Friends, we have got an amazing episode for you today. I am talking to Dr. Ashley Margeson, naturopathic doctor from Cornerstone here in Nova Scotia, and also the host of the Superwoman Code podcast. Oh my gosh, we've been planning this episode for so many months, and so awesome that we finally got to sit down and do this. We're talking all things hormone, talking all things burnout. It's longer than my usual podcast episodes, but it is full of so much goodness. It is well worth your time. I hope you enjoy it.
You're listening to the Wellness Simplified podcast. Simple wellness tips to help you improve your life without turning it upside down. With your host, award-winning fitness instructor, nutrition coach, and wellness expert, Susie Fevens.
Before we launch into today's episode, I want to make a note that there are two separate spots within our interview where you can hear a little bit of background noise, and that was because of a rogue item in a washing machine. I have tried to minimize it as much as possible, but if you do hear that clanking, that's what it is. Your speakers are not playing tricks on you. It's just a little bit of background noise. And I hope it's not too distracting because this is a fantastic episode and I didn't want to cut anything because I didn't want you to miss any of the goodness. Enjoy. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I am so excited today because we have my very own naturopathic doctor, Dr. Ashley Margeson, here with us today to talk to us about burnout. Do you want to introduce us and tell us a little bit about yourself, Ashley?
Yeah. So thank you for the introduction.
Oh, yes.
Seriously.
The 5 cent.
The 5 cent introduction.
Right.
So as Susie said, my name is Ashley. Everybody's like, it's Dr. Ashley. I'm like, I don't care about titles.
I know. I had a debate with myself this morning. It's like, do I call her Dr. Ashley? It doesn't seem right. It's like seeing your school teacher outside of school.
Or in the grocery store and you're like,
right.
Oh, yeah. So I am one of the team of naturopathic doctors at Cornerstone Naturopathic. I also happen to be the founder of the Superwoman Code, which is our online platform to teach women about their hormones and how we can optimize our cycles to prevent or recover from burnout. So in a closed notes version, I am just seriously obsessed with periods and the role that they play in our lives. And I question everything. So every single patient that I get to meet, every single conversation I get to have with people is all about trying to basically prove myself wrong. Trying to figure out how the pieces of the puzzle can get pieced together. What are the different ways we can piece that health puzzle together? And then my goal is to always retire my patients, which is, you sound like you're doing really good right now. I'm here if you need me, but you're tackling it, because my firm belief is that if you and I are still having the same conversation 6, 9, 12 months later, I haven't done my job right.
I don't want to pat myself on the back, but I've been retired.
You only needed a couple tweaks. Let's be honest.
This goes along with our conversation today, though, because for the most part, I know a lot about burnout. I am stress resilience certified coach and all of that. But sometimes, even when you know all the things, you still need some support. And I needed to have some things that I couldn't get myself. And I needed you to ask those questions so that we could figure out what those things were. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important for people to know that it doesn't matter how much you do or do not know. There's always somebody out there who can help support you when you need a little bit of extra support. So
you also can't treat yourself. And
no.
That's like it's really easy to be able to look at somebody else and pinpoint what's going on. It's really difficult to do it yourself. Like, I don't treat myself. Right. I have my team of people that I check in with. I call them my board of directors. And I check in with them because I'm like, I need that feedback coming in to be able for me to understand where I'm sitting in and what I need to adjust.
Yes, that's such a good point. I am a nutrition coach, and myself and another one of my friends who's a nutrition coach, we don't strictly coach each other on nutrition, but we still coach each other on things about nutrition. Like if we're thinking about changing something, saying like, what do you think? Like, your situation, but sometimes you're too close to it to really see.
You can't see
simple
the forest
thing
through the trees.
Absolutely. So it's so important to have other people that you can kind of lean on to help you see those things with more clarity.
Definitely. And when it comes to burnout, and that That is the most interesting part of burnout. Is the further into burnout you are, the harder it is to see what you need to do. And that is the biochemical and physiological result of burnout.
Yeah. And so I am so excited to have you on my podcast because in some respects I think we're the same person in a different body, because I too like to prove everything wrong. I can't tell you
Right?
how many times I have done something just to prove that it didn't work, and then it did work, and then I was like, well, that was disappointing. I mean, it was good, but it was also a little disappointing.
Yeah. I'm notorious for doing things ahead of time. And then people are like, why are you making that call right now? And I'm like, because I really hope that I'm wrong, but I don't think I am.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it happened. We bulk ordered a pile of stuff in early February because we saw what was going on with Ontario. And
Yeah.
I was like, I really hope that I'm wrong about this and that my visa maybe just takes a hit.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but then I wasn't, because all of the shipments got delayed out by 6 weeks.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh, okay, that's fun. That's great.
And
Awesome.
my in-person classes, I was still running them week to week.
Hmm.
And there was a couple of times I thought to myself, oh, I should just let people register for a month at a time. And then I was perfectly and absolutely validated when we were shut down in a matter of an hour. And I was lucky that it just so happened that I didn't have a class scheduled in person for that night. It was the day of the shutdown. I would normally have had a class that night,
And it just
but
wasn't.
I
See?
just didn't happen to have one because they were using the room for a training for the firefighters. So I wasn't having one. And so it just shut. I didn't have to do anything. Like everything was just done. Everybody was doing week to week. There wasn't a class that night anyway. So it was just done. And last year when we had to shut down, it was a bit of a nightmare.
Oh my God, the scheduling craziness. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm so
Yeah.
glad that that happened. That's good.
Yeah. So I am hoping that you will talk to us a little bit about burnout today, and we can talk
Yeah.
about me too if it comes up. I don't care. Everybody knows all of my business at this point. I like to share because I think it's important for people to be able to relate to things, and even though my story is not going to be the same as anybody else's story, it's still relevant. So I'm pretty open about those things, and I like to talk about periods and poop as well. So.
All right, so let's get started. Where do you want to start? Give me the lowdown
Yes.
about
Okay.
where we're going to dive in.
I would love for you to tell us a couple really common signs that you are starting to experience burnout, because
Ooh,
I think that people are experiencing it and don't even realize.
I would argue that right now, probably 80% of anybody who is working is experiencing burnout. And I define working as also going to school.
I think
Because
you're being conservative with that percentage.
80%. And like, I will call that one, if not, like, that is my bare minimum. I think it could be potentially more right now,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that, and just before we jump into that, I think that we are seeing a missing piece of the puzzle right now, because the people who aren't burning out are not talking about it on social media. Like,
Yes.
we are it, and it's a coping mechanism that I think is really important, but just a heads up on that side of things. So, the most common signs of burnout are things that people don't normally associate with burnout. And so, basically, what burnout is your body's capacity to adapt to change has decreased. And because it's decreased, but generally because we still have to do things, our bodies are having to adjust to make that happen. And so one of the first things that pops up as you go into kind of stage, well, let's go through this. There's different stages of burnout. So you
Yes.
don't just end up burnt out, like draw a line in the sand and be like, you toe over that and you're like, all of a sudden you're burnt out. It doesn't work that way. Burnout is a syndrome. And so the first part of burnout is actually when your adrenaline is really high. So you get that new job, you start a new relationship, your kids do something really well at something, maybe your parents got a really cool kind of whatever it is going on. And so it's that kind of internal energy of like, oh, I can totally do this. If you're at your job, it's taking on that new project, it's getting a raise, it's getting a promotion, it's getting more kind of things to do. If you're working for yourself, it's maybe landing a contract, it's maybe, starting a new fitness class, it's maybe taking a course to kind of push your learning. Those are all pieces of the burnout puzzle. And so this is actually a really important kind of thing to go through. You want that adrenaline coming in and pushing you through. It's just, can you adapt to that to make sure that you don't start to deplete your energy at the same time? And so when you start to deplete your energy, that's where you start to get these really kind of impactful or maybe negatively impacting symptoms. And those are things like, are you waking up rested in the morning? Are you good for 2.5 to 3 hours and then you're crashing out? Are you forgetting to eat during the day because you're actually just not hungry? Are you getting a mid-afternoon crash? 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock hits and you are just done. The further into burnout you get, into that stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, you may or may not get a second wind. And generally, the further on in the evening that second wind hits, the further into burnout you are. So if you crash out at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but then you're peaking back up at 5 o'clock, okay, so interesting, but not actually terrible. That's really workable. That's where lifestyle changes come into play. If you're crashing out at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and you're not getting a second wind up until 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night, we have a much different conversation, because it is taking you that long to get that cortisol back up and running. And that's not supposed to be what happens, because if that happens, and you're awake at 9 o'clock and you're getting a second wind, you're not going to even want to go to sleep until midnight to 1 a.m. And if you do happen to go to sleep, you're waking up at those witching hours, which is like 1:30, 2:30, 3 a.m. in the morning. And because you're waking up at those witching hours and it's associated with a burnout response, you wake up feeling like you should actually, like, you wake up feeling great. You're like, I can put a little laundry in. I can change what's going on. I can, write that email or X, Y, and Z, because you're waking up to a cortisol response. You're supposed to get that response. It's supposed to happen to wake you up in the morning, not at 1 a.m. in the morning. Associated with that, we then, especially in women, we see changes with periods. All of a sudden, you can miss a period. It can come a little bit early. It could come a little bit late. It can be more clotty. It can be more sludgy. It can be more painful. And your PMS can get more significant. And it's those big kind of PMS mood changes that we really start to look for with the burnout cascades, specifically with women, because that's your capacity to cope with change. In that second half of your cycle, when you've between ovulation and start of your period, your capacity as your body decreases already, because you have multiple hormones all competing with each other, all changing, all going up and down and all over the place. So your body's capacity naturally decreases at that part of your cycle. If you are burnt out, that capacity gets crunched even more, which means we are going to see PMS. We are going to see mood swings. We are going to see depressive episodes. We are going to see, like, you're just like, somebody says something that you don't agree with and you cry.
Oh my goodness. There was so much in there just now that I think a lot of people needed to hear. And I think a lot of people probably related to without even realizing it.
And that's where burnout, and that's like the physiological response to burnout. As you get further and further into burnout, things get sticky. And I have no other way to describe it other than that. But because your capacity has decreased, because your brain's capacity is decreasing, it's very hard for you to prioritize. Like, incredibly hard to prioritize. And this is not that stage 1, stage 2 burnout of I walk into a room and I forget why I'm there, or I have words on the tip of my tongue and I'm describing it, but I can't actually find what I'm looking for. That's a short-term memory deficit that's caused by an adrenaline and cortisol kind of conversation. What the stickiness is you can't let things go. So stuff's coming at you, and normally you're like, I can shrug that off. That doesn't bother me. Like, I don't know, a kid left a dish in the sink, or your husband or partner didn't close the cupboard door. Does anybody else do that? I swear every time I walk into the kitchen, there's like 6 doors open.
It's more drawers. It's drawers here.
What is going on? Sorry, Ben, I'm going to throw you under the bus on that one. But like, it's those type of responses of, you're like, normally you just shut it and go on with your day and it's no big deal. But if you're burnt out, you can't let that go. It's sticking with you. It's the email that maybe came in from your boss or somebody that you're working with that maybe you just actually read in a negative way and you just can't let it go. It's that rumination at the back of your head of just like, your best friend dumped something on you because that's what you guys do, but this one is sticking with you. You can't get out of it. And so that is one of the hardest things with burnout, is because you can't filter anymore. It means you can't prioritize, which means you're holding on to more things, which means your capacity to deal with it is getting even smaller, which is why burnout is this perfect storm that there's no perfect answer to. And it is so dependent on your individual circumstances.
Oh my gosh, I find this all so fascinating for a multitude of reasons. Number one, when I have those issues, I refer to them as being irrationally angry because I generally know that I'm being ridiculous over
Oh,
something.
your logical brain knows that you
Yeah,
shouldn't be reacting to it at that
right,
point. This is not a logical conversation. This is a
right.
reactionary conversation.
And I think a really good example of this, and I've probably talked about it before on the podcast, back the very first time I think I experienced burnout, I was having a lot of irrationally angry thoughts. And I had somebody in one of my classes, bless her heart. She is of average height. She was wearing pants that I deemed to be too short for pants, but too long for capri pants. And for some reason, that made me so angry that day. And why do I care? Why do I care?
You're
But
like,
it
this
was
has no
just
effect on me at all.
none, literally zero, except for the fact that I had to see them. And because she was of average height, if someone's shorter, sometimes capri pants will look almost like pants. And if someone's
Oh,
tall,
as the like 5 foot,
right.
not even 5'1" person in this conversation right now, I have little capri pants on me right now that are supposed to just hit like right at the knee, and they're like 4 inches below
I
the
didn't
knee.
realize you were so pocket sized.
I'm pocket sized.
See, so that wouldn't have bothered me because in my mind it was like, okay, well, she's on the shorter side. So this person is of average height. And I think of that often. Like that is just the epitome of irrational anger because there's literally no reason. If you go into your kitchen and the cabinets are open, it is a very minor inconvenience, but it is a
It's a
minor
minor, it's a
her
minor
pants were a
inconvenience.
zero inconvenience. And I was like, inside, I could just feel the flames. I was so wound up. So that is my example of
That's
irrational
burnout.
anger. Yeah.
And that is burnout. And burnout is something like so many people are like, oh, like burnout is just a COVID phenomenon. And I'm like,
Right.
burnout, no.
You're
We have
just
been
figuring out you've been burnt out for the last decade because of
well,
it. But
and you know what? I did a panel discussion a couple weeks ago for the Halifax Chamber of Commerce on burnout and what COVID and this nice little global pandemic has done. It has taken away a lot of these coping mechanisms that we
yeah.
put in. It's because a lot of people are working from home, you're seeing it now. So you're seeing the changes because kids are maybe at home or parents are maybe at home or we're worrying about different things that we really can't control. You're actively seeing it in other people's lives and your own life in a way that you never have before.
Yeah. And it's
And
become
so
harder to ignore
it's
too.
harder to ignore. And so what the last year has done is it's taken away a lot of that shadowing, and it has made burnout and specifically women's unpaid labor, which is one of the reasons why women tend to burn out at a much earlier age and be
Mhm.
much faster than men do. It has just it has brought all of the research that has been done over literally the last 45 years to a forefront.
Yeah. Because I think there's a lot of people who, up until they found themselves in a global pandemic, didn't even know that burnout was an actual real thing.
Thing.
Like it
Yeah.
was a thing that you talked about and you're like, oh, I'm burned out today,
It's
but
like, oh,
not
I'm
at
trying like the paleo diet or I'm trying this diet. It's like, oh, I'm burnt out
exactly.
today.
Yeah.
It's just
Not
like something you
something.
throw out. No, this is
Right.
a like so there is a medical definition
Yes.
that we follow to define if you are burnt out or not. And then what we've done as a team at Cornerstone, and it doesn't matter if you see me, if you see Ben, if you see Jeremy, like we all work from the same kind of baseline around this, is we've defined stages within that criteria. And so the criteria is based off of a researcher out of the University of, I think it's California, I may be wrong, and it's a female researcher, which is really cool because we just didn't
Yeah.
see a lot of that in the late 90s, early 2000s. And her name is Maslach. And so it's the Maslach's burnout inventory, which is what we use to define burnout. And that has three categories. One is exhaustion and tiredness. Two is irritability. And the third is a feeling of unproductiveness or a feeling of blah. I can't remember the word for it right now, but it's that feeling associated with your work. And so Maslach's burnout inventory has always been associated with workplaces and working a 9 to 5 job. And what we have really seen over the last year, and I mean, like I'm saying this, being like I've seen this my entire career,
Right.
but what globally we have seen over the last year is that it doesn't matter if you work a 9 to 5, it doesn't matter if you work part-time, it doesn't matter if you're a stay-at-home parent, it fits to all of those scenarios.
That's just so much for a person to stop and think about. And I know,
Right.
yeah, like, gosh, I had something I was going to say, and then you just hit me with all that awesome info and it just fell right out of my head.
So speaking of burnout, how's that short-term memory?
It's good usually, but you know what? On that note, I've always been the person that everybody always asked random things to, like, do you remember when did that happen? And I'm always very, very, very good with timelines.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think this is a burnout thing. I think this is a COVID thing. Since the pandemic, I'm not so good with the things from the last year and a half, but I think it's because I don't have the same things to relate to. Usually I'm like, oh, well, that happened because that was the week after we went here and did this and whatever. And now it's like, I'm in this house all of the time. So it's always that wall behind me. I don't have the same reference point.
It's called relational memory.
Yes.
Is what it's called. And so that relational memory is how you define what happened in kind of a space and time and all of the continuums that Doctor Strange can talk about. Just made an Avengers.
Hey, I'm here for it. Obviously, you've
been
sitting here looking at posters of Marvel things for quite some time. It was inevitable.
It was inevitable. I actually, on a fully different note in terms of comic books, my hero growing up was Peggy Carter, and I just wanted to be Peggy Carter. Like I had all
Who can blame you?
Right? I had like all of the Avengers comic books that she was in. And they were like the only ones I had, but this was like I love Peggy Carter. I think she's
I embarrassingly wanted to be Penny from Inspector Gadget.
Who's also a super cool kick-ass woman. Yes.
One time for Christmas, I actually asked for her like notebook computer.
Yeah.
That was before those were even in existence. And now I'm just like, look at my MacBook and my iPad, everybody. It took a while, but I have it.
I have it. Anyway, back to burnout. So burnout is really interesting from that was a really bad timeline, just that there was no connection there. But burnout is really interesting for women because, and I want to pull this research paper, and it came out in 2008, and it's actually a position paper from one of the UN has some segments on burnout. It's from one of their subsections.
Mm-hmm.
And so what it looked at, it looked at the role of unpaid labor for women. And so what we actually studied, and I think it was based in London, and correct me, global world, if I am wrong on this one, but what it found that if men had a heart attack, they recovered at home 2 times faster than if women had a heart attack recovering at home. The interesting part of this is that if it was a single man versus a single woman, they recovered at the same speed.
Mm-hmm. I believe it. Yeah. I believe it.
And so what we're starting to see is all of these elements of this research that we know that women are more likely to go above and beyond and do the little things, the rumination things of like, did Bobby get that, his bike fixed, or did so-and-so did we get a gift for that birthday party this week, or did we wrap it, or it's picture day, or like you have to bring an egg carton into school, or if you're working, 9 times out of 10, the person asked to take notes in the meeting is the woman. Are
Mm-hmm.
you doing that? Are you doing like, are you sending out the gift card or purchasing the happy birthday card that everybody has to sign? A lot of these kind of nuances in culture are all left to women. And what that does is that negatively impacts our health, because not only are we spending our 9 to 5 time working on what we need to do for everybody else, we're also taking up all of these little things. And then when we get home at the end of the day, we are still doing that. So it doesn't matter if you have children or if you have parents, the women in the relationships tend to be the ones that are doing the majority of the work on that. And you can make a variety of different excuses as to why that may happen, which is maybe you're better at it. Maybe you're an only child. Maybe you're the one who lives closest to your parents. I'm talking like globally, we know that women are more likely to be doing that work. What we don't talk about, though, is that women's bodies are less able to work overtime than men's bodies are.
Ooh.
And this is not opinion, this is data. Like, this is just research. So let's just take a typical 40-hour work week. Generally, everybody's going to do relatively well at 40 hours. Men, though, will actually work their best between 45 to 58 hours a week. So working overtime, men actually do better at that point. They have less anxiety. They have less depression. They are less likely to have a heart attack if they are working in that amount of hours a week. Women, if they work more than it's actually 38 hours a week, they are at higher risk for anxiety. They are at higher risk for depression. They are more likely to be having a heart attack at like within their kind of 50s than their male counterparts are. And so we've looked at this data for a really long time, and we've kind of gone like, so why can men work overtime? And this is specifically overtime with work, and they actually do relatively well, but women can't do the same thing. And the missing piece of the puzzle actually came up in 2016 from a data perspective of going, it's because women are generally spending 30 extra hours a week doing the unpaid labor side of things. So in actuality, women aren't working a 40-hour week, they're working a 70-hour week. And so if now we're taking a 70-hour week and we're putting an additional 15 hours on top of that, no wonder we're at risk for anxiety. No wonder we're at risk for depression. And this is just data.
Oh my gosh, that's so fascinating because I've heard all of those data points before, but never put in a way that made you think of it that way. Like, never really thought of the fact that if the female has a lower capacity because of all of those other things. Just wow.
And that's where burnout comes into play. Is burnout becomes a conversation of what is your capacity on a day-to-day basis. And one of the things that we forget about is that women are not supposed to feel the same way every single day. And I am notoriously like preach this one on social media as often as I can, because we don't work on a 24-hour cycle. We work on a 24 to 39 day cycle, whatever is your norm, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so people are like, I don't have a 28-day cycle, I have a 29-day cycle. And I'm like, that is perfectly fine if that is consistent. You can have a 35-day cycle. If that's consistently a 35-day cycle, that's great. You're ovulating consistently. And so maybe you're ovulating a little bit differently than the person next door to you, but you're still good. And so what we need to realize is that when it comes to managing our careers and managing care and managing all of these other things that we're doing, we have to take into account that our capacity is supposed to change on a day-to-day basis. And so that's why, and this is one of the things that I think we beat ourselves up for is we accomplished a ton of tasks one day. Like, you're gonna have a day where you're like, I did 2 loads of laundry, I got all of those emails done, I managed to do the groceries, and I like spent time with for myself, and I read a book, and I like accomplished I checked this list. And then you try and do the same thing 2 weeks later, and you can barely get one thing done. Well, that's not because you're doing anything wrong. That's because your capacity changed because your hormones changed. And so and this is where I think women actually have the capacity to really harness their hormones to to move through burnout and to avoid burnout. Because if we start structuring our days in a way where we go, okay, so first half of my cycle is like start of my period to ovulation. Generally, at that point, your estrogen is rising. Estrogen is your kick ass, take names, be creative, get stuff done, fire at all cylinders hormones. Estrogen's really important. Estrogen gets beat up a lot on
It
social
really
media.
does. It
It's
really
like
does.
everybody's like, oh, my estrogen's too high. This is why I'm X, Y, and Z. I'm like, your estrogen's really important. Like, don't mess with your estrogen. You need more of it, not less, most of the time. That's a whole other conversation. And so estrogen is what basically gives us that internal energy to basically layer. Like, we're really good at layering when we're in that first half of our cycle. As we hit ovulation, our adrenaline rises and our testosterone rises and our estrogen's at its peak and all of the other hormones are like coming into play. And so ovulation wise, like, this is like, if you want to ask for a raise, ask for a raise when you're ovulating. Like, literally, like, you are going to, like, 9 times out of 10, it's going to go really, really well. If you're going to give a really cool presentation or a really big contract, if you can time it with your ovulation, it's easier because your system is already doing that work. So it's easier for you to capitalize on it. It's not that you can't do it at another time. It's just, if you have the capacity to do it when it's going to make the most sense, do it when it's going to make the most sense.
From a running standpoint, I've given up my running coach certification now, but there's this whole theory of timing. If you're trying to get a personal best in a race, in a marathon, and timing it in your cycle in the right time, or else you won't get it. Because of course you also have the whole changing of your body temperature at different points of your cycle, and the respiratory changes that happen as well. So yeah, it happens. And that's something people don't think about too, is exercise. It shouldn't be the same all month long. It should change.
Not supposed to be the same all month long. And where it really comes in is that second half of your cycle. And so the second half of your cycle is like ovulation to start of period. And that's where progesterone starts to become a really important conversation. And so progesterone only gets produced if you ovulate, which is why women, like, our mood will change a lot when we're in perimenopause, because we're ovulating some months and we're not ovulating other months. And that's exactly what's supposed to happen. And that's totally okay. But with progesterone is our calming neurotransmitter. It's our chill out neurotransmitter. It's our, like, let me logic things through as opposed to react to things, a hormone, not neurotransmitter. And so progesterone is basically supposed to buffer all of the other changes that are going on with all of the other hormones, because all of your other hormones are like super high, so they have to drop down. But estrogen drops and then it goes back up and then it drops again. And like testosterone bottoms out and then it actually bounces back up and then it bottoms out again. And then our adrenaline just goes all over the place. Very scientific conversation right there. But
it was just scientific enough. It was just enough.
Like, basically, it's just chaos in the second half of your cycle, but purposeful chaos. And so progesterone is supposed to buffer that. Progesterone is supposed to come in to make it easier to adapt to all of those changes. It's just that progesterone and cortisol are linked. And cortisol is your runaway. Well, start the runaway from a conversation. Start the runaway from a bear conversation. And progesterone is your rest and digest and thrive conversation. And the way that we have culturally and societally evolved is to not die if a dinosaur or a bear came along. So we are preconditioned to constantly create more cortisol, which then creates adrenaline, as opposed to progesterone. So if you're in a burnout response, you're having to run on adrenaline a little bit more than you should, which means your body is preferentially making more cortisol and adrenaline than it is progesterone. For women, what that means is we're losing our buffering capacity. So our buffering capacity that's already a little bit less in that second half of our cycle is now getting bottomed out, which means that we need recovery time built in. But a lot of us feel like we can't build in recovery time because as our capacity decreases, we get less stuff done. So we're not getting things done. So then we feel like we're behind and we feel like we're letting people down and we feel like all of the guilt stuff that comes up that I'm like, oh my God, the guilt is the worst part about it. I
Yeah.
swear. But all of that stuff comes up. And then we come out of our PMS phase, we come out of our luteal phase, we come into that first half of our cycle again, and we're done. Like we're not getting that estrogen rise right now because we're expending all of that energy trying to catch up to the things that we missed beforehand. That means that we're just bottoming out our cortisol even more, which means we're just bottoming out our progesterone even more the next time. And it's this perfect cycle that now you're just not getting ahead. And that's how burnout hits women's hormones specifically.
Wow. Okay. So I'm assuming that a lot of people listening are thinking, oh my gosh, like I'm at least at stage 1.
Yep.
Maybe stage 2, maybe
Probably
3.
stage at this point, especially in our global world, probably stage 2 or stage 3, which is why this third lockdown has been so hard for so many people.
Our
Like
capacity is
dramatically,
just,
we don't have the adrenaline rush anymore.
no,
Last time this happened, it was a like, oh, all of a sudden I'm getting a little bit of time to spend on my house and to do this project and to learn how to make this meal and to maybe spend time with my family and to just drop that adrenaline cascade down. Like middle March, April, May of 2020 was actually quite slow. This time around, we don't have that adrenaline hit.
Yeah.
We're past stage 1. We don't have that anymore. We're just, it's hard.
Yeah, I think of it sort of, I use a lot of analogies relating to a bank account because I think that it's easy to relate to, but like we had a savings account last year, we still had a savings account and we drew on that and the balance got lower and lower. And now that savings account is empty or it's overdrawn and there's just nothing there to take from. And
yeah, the battery there was a lot of positives that came in from an external environment perspective last year. Those positives aren't coming in the same way anymore.
Yeah.
And so you're having to actively make them, which if you can, that's great. That's good stress resilience. You've built those things. You've learned that. If you can't, it means that something else has to happen first.
All right. So if we're listening and we're realizing that we probably are more burned out than we thought, A, what are some things that maybe we should think about or look into or start doing to help ourselves? B, when do we know that we've gotten to that point where we really need to reach out to somebody like you to get some extra support to help us recover?
I mean, so I always think about your health as a board of directors anyway. So I am very much on the, like, you talk preventative health from a movement perspective. I talk it from this perspective is even if you feel like you're in stage 2, stage 3, you should still be having those conversations with your team, whoever your team is, because you need to be putting a plan in place for if that tips, you just initialize. Ideally, you should have a burnout recovery plan already made so that you just have to do it, as opposed to you're in stage 3, stage 4, can't get out of bed. You probably need to be looking at medications at that point to help you through it. We want to try and hit it at that stage 2, stage 1 area. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So that is my like perfect world scenario. You would have a burnout recovery plan. Perfect.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but do you not have a
burnout recovery plan that people can find online on an online course? I do. Actually, it's called Burnout Blueprint.
So that is
our online
resource,
course, which is a phenomenal resource because what it's designed to do is help you A, understand which part of burnout you're in, but B, help you develop that plan to help you recover. And that plan has to have a board of directors at play.
Yeah, and we will absolutely link that in the description so that you can find that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's super, like, it is so simple. And that is what if you are in burnout or you're looking at doing something right now about it, you have to go simple.
Yeah.
So burnout is not the time to do more, it's the time to do less. And so there's 4 cornerstones that we look at. One is sleep. Sleep is the critical thing as you get further along in burnout. You need to be able to sleep deeply to be able to recover. If you can't get to sleep, it doesn't matter what else you do. You're going to be running on adrenaline all day. So sleep is the critical kind of conversation first. Then it's your nutrition, because you need to fuel your body. And with burnout, people are like, oh, like I'm going to eat a salad. I'm like, if you're burnt out, you're not digesting a salad. You know how I feel about this.
Also, I don't know what kind of salad they're having, but what are we having? 120 calories there? Like,
Nope. So salads, like lettuce, is actually really hard to break down. And
very
if
hard.
you're in burnout response, what happens is your stomach acid is less and your enzymes are less, because your body thinks that you're running away from a bear. It is not designed to digest food at this point. So what you need to be doing is you need to be doing the slow cookers, the stuff that's pre-digested, basically, the stuff that's already broken down, the roasted vegetables,
the nice unctuous things. Yeah.
Right. And this is where you go like, and this is where you buy stuff. This is where you buy the chicken pot pie and you put it in the oven. You buy the lasagna, you put it in the oven. You get the prepackaged soup or the dal or the whatever, and you put it in the oven, because at this stage of burnout, I don't care what you're eating. I just need you to eat.
100%. And I think that right there is what a lot of people need to just concern themselves with. I had a conversation with someone just the other day who was like, I don't know what I'm going to have for supper. And I was making stew that day. And they're like, oh, I don't want to do that. And I said, do you have a frozen pizza? Like, I don't care what it is.
Oh, I
just eat
love
something, please.
The frozen pizzas. So there are literally like 6 frozen pizzas in our freezer right now. Like we have 2 deep freezes for this exact reason. We run like, we're 2 career, have kids, like run busy lives. Yeah, we cook, like we're not cooking an hour and a half meal we're not cooking something that takes an hour and a half to make, maybe on a weekend.
Right.
So
I also am I do love a frozen pizza myself.
I do love a frozen pizza. I really do. Frozen pizza, and then add stuff to it. Right? That's your base. You don't have to just eat the frozen pizza. Like put some shaved Brussels sprouts and some red onions and some sort of protein and a little bit of cheese on there and like some pesto and
I love pesto on a pizza.
Right? Pesto on pizza is the best thing. But when you're in burnout, you just need to eat. The hard thing is, by the time you've realized that you're in burnout, most of the conversation wise with my patients, you've hit the point where, because you are so tired, your body is holding on to all of that extra energy, which means you've probably gained weight. And so, because the world likes to tell us that we're supposed to look a certain way, the natural inclination for a lot of my female patients is like, I need to lose weight right now. And so whether we consciously or unconsciously do it, we slightly restrict what we're eating. And I find that a lot of my patients, it's very unconscious. We don't realize that we're quite doing it. It's just, when you're in burnout, you need to be increasing your caloric intake and your nutrient density intake to refuel those cells. And so it's this perfect storm of, if you restrict what you're eating, whether or not you realize you're doing it, you're going to stay in burnout for a longer period of time. But that's a big conversation around like, how do you feel about your body kind of thing, which is a conversation that I think we can only really have as a culture as we kind of start to have this conversation with our daughters as well and sons. So that's kind of the food side of it, which is like, I just need you to eat. Like, I just need you to eat and I just need to digest your food. The movement side of it, it depends on which stage of burnout you're in. If you're in stage 1 burnout, you actually probably need to go for a run or do a high intensity interval training class or a high intensity and like high impact class, because you've got adrenaline that you need to burn off. Yeah. Because I need you to sleep. So I need you to not be wired all night. If you're in stage 3 burnout, like low intensity, you can go for a walk. You can do yin yoga. You cannot sweat. Like if you are sweating, you are going to high intensity for where you're at right now, because we need to conserve energy. And so this is where that whole conversation about where are you at in your cycle as well. Low, like luteal phase, which is second half of your cycle, you need more lower intensity, medium intensity workouts. You can do a workout that's high intensity around ovulation, no problem. That's not going to tank you. 3 days before your period, you want to go for a 10K run. Slightly different conversation there. Probably not going to work so well.
And this is something that does not get talked about enough, in my opinion. There's so few training programs that have any basis on the female hormone system. That's why I'm making one, but it's just not done yet.
Yeah, you are.
Because so many of these programs, fitness programs, are put together by men or researched on men. And
Oh,
that's not the
98%
same. That's
of
not the same situation.
98% of research on exercise in general is always done on men, and we just
And
assume that women are the
nutrition
same. And nutrition, and don't get me started on keto diets
or fasting.
or fasting. And like it's and this is the thing is like, let's just say you have a history of PCOS. Cool. And it's insulin resistance driven.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Fasting's probably going to work really well for you. Intermittent fasting. And the
Yeah.
research is really strong on that.
On that. Yeah.
That particular population.
Right.
If that's not what's going on, chances are you're going to put yourself in a nutrient deficiency and it's going to
Mm-hmm.
throw your hormones off. Same with keto. Carbs are really important.
Yeah.
I will totally say this in your podcast. Like, I am not a fan of keto because there are 2 research papers out there around women. And
Yeah.
both of those do not match most women in a general population.
And let's not forget, what was keto created for? It was created for short-term.
It's created for short-term medical interventions. And
for
it
children,
works really well.
Children with epilepsy. Are you a child with epilepsy?
If you follow the research and you match the research, that's a really logical thing to do if it makes sense for your medical background.
Right.
But it should not be something that you just do because you feel like you need to lose weight. Like, it is just going to compound other conversations.
Not to mention the fact that the weight that you're going to lose initially, that wonderful drop, you've made yourself fatter because that was just the water in your muscles being removed.
It's a drop in inflammation.
Right.
It's just water. It's just you're just losing water right now. And that's fine. That's good.
It is.
But
it's not like, fat.
It has to be done for a medical reason to follow the research that's out there. Okay. This is why we're friends. Okay. So sleep is really important. And you have to get yourself to sleep and you have to get yourself back to sleep because you will wake up when you're in burnout. It's not about sleeping through the night. It's about how fast can you get back to sleep when you do wake up. We've talked about nutrition. We've talked about movement. And the other thing is boundaries, which is happiness. Boundaries are incredibly important and hard. And you cannot set a boundary when you are in stage 3 or stage 4 burnout. It's not going to happen. It is not the conversation to have at that point. But setting boundaries is how you develop your burnout recovery and your burnout prevention plan. That is where you go, what is my purpose? What is bringing me joy? Where do I need to focus? What do I need to be doing? And that is a conversation that hits family, that hits personal, that hits careers, that hits workplaces. It is a very big conversation. And so in order to have that conversation, you need to be not like burnt out. And this is a conversation I have with my patients a lot. They're like, I want to have this conversation with my boss or my team, but I can't do it without crying. Because you're so tired and you're so burnt out that it's just an emotional release. And so this is where we go, like, there is that emotional side of it. We know that conversation needs to be had. Now is not the time to have it, but it is the time to start writing down things. I feel happy. I feel joyful with this. This is bothering me. This is impacting me. I can't get this off of my chest. At this point in the burnout cycle, if you're in stage 3, stage 4, you just need to be writing it down. You just need something that you can then go back to and go, okay, now I need to develop a plan around that. And that's where your board of directors comes into play. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a naturopathic doctor, maybe it's your massage therapist, maybe it's your psychologist, your counselor, your medical doctor, your nurse practitioner, your specialist, if you have specialists. They all have to be part of that board of directors. Anybody that comes in and says it's my way or the highway, you need a team of people to help you make these decisions. I have patients that we've put board of directors together for that I've linked up patients because I'm like, you guys actually need to be having this conversation together, because once it comes to that boundary impact, once it comes to that, like, how do you design your life? That's not my job anymore, right? Like, my job is to get you to that point. Once you're there, that's not my role anymore. Which sometimes I wish it was, but nobody has all of the answers. You have to build in that board of directors. You have to surround yourself with people who can give you those reference points, who can help you engage with where you want to develop. And your board of directors can't include your spouse. Can't. like no go. Your spouse is there, your spouse is good, but your spouse is too close. Your spouse doesn't get to be on your board of directors.
That's
The big conversation.
yeah.
And that's why that's why burnout can be very overwhelming. It's why we like full unplug. It's why we designed Burnout Blueprint, because like to sit here and have this conversation, you're like, there's a lot of elements at play. There are a lot of elements at play. That's why you never go from 0 to burnt out, right? It's this slow trickle down. And then you have these perfect storm scenarios that you can't control. Global pandemic, perfect storm. Nobody
Yeah.
could control that one at
No.
all. We just had to adapt to it. Kids at
Mhm.
home, you had to adapt to it. Parents getting sick, you had to adapt to it. Job change, you had to adapt to it. Like all of these big things that you just had to adapt to. And the lesser your capacity, the harder it is to adapt. And so that's why it's these perfect storm scenarios, which is why it's not your fault, but it is your job to go like, I need help.
So, where is there a definitive point of no return where you know I can't do this on my own? I absolutely need someone like Dr. Ashley to help me recover. Is there a point where
If you're not sleeping, that's your point.
that was
So if
me?
you are waking, that was you.
Hi.
So there's a couple different points because tipping points are different for every person. So
Right.
there's a big sleep cascade one, which is like, yeah, you can have a couple nights of not good sleep, no big
Yeah.
deal. And then you're fine after that. That I'm not worried about. It's when all of a sudden you're having trouble falling asleep and then you're waking up every hour or 2 hours. You need to have an intervention at that point, and melatonin's not going to do it.
No.
This is not a melatonin conversation. This is a different conversation. So there's that side of it. Then there's the mood side of it. Are you irrationally angry at everything? Are you
At
bursting
people's
into
pants?
tears? Yada, yada, yada. That's an intervention point. Are you having multiple rounds of bowel movements a day? Are they loose? Do you see undigested food in there? That's an intervention component. And then if your periods are going really off, and that's actually where I meet a lot of my patients is because I talk about hormones so much, they're like, my period's off. And we dive into it and you're like, you're burnt out. Like, your period is a symptom right now. We need to fix the burnout. And then the periods get better. Right.
Yeah.
So it's what are the tipping points that you're noticing that, let's just say, and a big one is actually weight. And it's I started moving, I changed my nutrition, I started doing all of these things, but I'm gaining weight or I'm not losing it. That's a big intervention point because you're like, something's biochemically off. Like if you've changed your nutrition and you're moving more and you're not seeing even muscle development coming in, that's a different conversation.
Yeah. And I think that it's important too for people to know that it can take a while. Like I gained a bunch of weight when I was burnt out and it hasn't found its way back off yet. It's going to eventually once everything settles down. I'm not worried about it.
Yeah, and the conversation around that is the timeline is so different for women. Like it takes 8 weeks to build muscle as you start doing a medium intensity type movement, which means you got to start at low intensity first and get to medium intensity. So that timeline isn't even included in this. Once you're at medium intensity 3 to 4 times a week, you should see muscle development in 8 weeks. Then you should see toning in another 4 to 8 weeks. And it's only after you get to that point that you actually start to see a change in adipose tissue.
Yeah.
Like that's 16 weeks out from getting to medium intensity activity.
Right. It takes a while.
It takes a while. It's supposed to take a while.
It's not supposed to be a 30-day
fast.
Right.
Yeah, your 7-day like detox is not going to fix that.
Yeah. And people get so frustrated because they expect to see a change quickly. And that's just every time you expect to see a change quickly, you're just effectively making it worse, not better.
The hardest part about it too is that we haven't talked about the fact that like men and women have different biochemical processes that control this.
Yes.
Literally.
Yeah.
And so men, and I think that I'm lovingly so, conversation with all my patients. They're like, my husband stopped drinking, or partner stopped drinking beer for a weekend and lost 5 pounds. And I'm like, yeah, that is a biochemical process and a physiological process that women do not have, because we have estrogen and progesterone. And then we have different responses with our cortisol and our adrenaline. And we're not supposed to lose 5 pounds when we stop drinking beer for the weekend, because if we did, culturally we wouldn't have survived, because women's bodies are the bodies that adapted to famines and droughts and changes in what we were eating. And that's how we survived as a human being.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you don't get to compare your own journey to your partner, who, if they are, especially if they are a different gender,
Mm-hmm.
because all you're going to do is set yourself up for feeling like you're failing.
And frustration and
And
giving up.
frustration and giving up. Because if all of a sudden your partner's losing 5 pounds and then they're down 10 pounds and you're down half a pound, you feel like you're doing something wrong. But in actuality, that's exactly what's supposed to happen. If not, you actually gaining weight first as you develop muscle. It's
Yeah.
supposed to go that way.
Can we get a billboard? Can we chip in on a billboard?
I think we should. Right as you come over, like Gaspro.
Yeah. Yes, that's everybody likes. Yeah.
Favorite. Everybody takes a picture of it anyway.
They do. And then they could get our billboard and then we can get the message out. Oh my gosh. I could listen to you talk about this for the next 7 days straight, but I won't hold you up for a week.
But that's okay, because and full on pitch for the Superwoman Code. This is what we talk about every single week on the Superwoman Code.
And if you're not listening to the Superwoman Code, I don't know why. First of all, go subscribe, because it is that and my favorite book podcast. Those are the two that I religiously listen to.
Aw, thank you.
It's true. And I find it funny because you and I, we come out with almost, it's like we're
our
a week
podcast
apart.
episodes
it's hilarious.
Literally roll into each other. And
it's so funny.
Like, we don't talk about this ahead of time. But I think it's the nature of being a bit on the tip of the what do we actually need to be talking about right now.
I find it so funny. I don't know how far out you record your podcast, but I batch record usually a month in advance. And then I'm like, I see your social posts and I'm like, well, look at that.
I full on batch record too. Like, I actually have the whole plan done for the year, and it changes. Like, you insert and you tweak and you go. But like these are bulk recorded. Like, I don't record every single week. That is not a good use of my capacity.
That's a perfect example. Getting yourself more capacity by batching things is my new favorite thing in the world, is trying to do one thing and make it work twice. So the other day I recorded, while I was teaching my live Zumba class on Zoom, I had my DSLR set up right behind my webcam. So I could record it
for another one.
For my online platform. Yeah.
Yes, you were. Yes, you were. All right, friends. So,
yes, thank you so much. If you were going to give, if you're going to give one sentence. Yeah. If you're going to give a person one succinct thing to do or work towards, if they know that they are experiencing burnout, what is the number one thing that they should work on?
Less is more.
Ooh,
always.
It is. And try to double up everything.
Less is always more.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Oh my gosh. I told you it was a good one, right? It was a good one. So much great information. Thank you so much to Dr. Ashley Margeson for coming and hanging out with us and giving us so much information packed in that hour. Holy moly. All of her links are going to be in the description below. The link to the Burnout Blueprint, her social media links, her podcast links, etc. Everything you can find right there. And if for some reason you can't find what you're looking for, send me a message and I will get it to you. Thank you so much for tuning in and for listening to this whole episode. I really hope you got a lot out of it, because even though I've heard a lot of these things, it never hurts to hear them and hear them in a different way. So thank you for listening. Thank you again to Dr. Ashley Margeson. I will talk to you next time. Enjoy the rest of your day.